Welcome to Empathetic Educators. I'm your host, Naomi Toland, and today we have a little bit of a different background because I'm very lucky to be in Singapore in my uncle's apartment as I'm staying with him because I'm part of the Google Innovator program that's in Singapore at this time. So I am just having an amazing time so far, getting prepared for the session to start. And that means that the Google Innovator is where teachers from all around the world or educators from all around the world come together and you think about challenges in education and collaborate and overcome them together. So I am extremely excited about that. And I thought I would just take the opportunity to record outside because I can. So this session is extremely exciting for me because we have one of the most influential, provoking, and amazing researchers of education, and that person is John Hattie. So we have a session today with him, and it's a two-part series. So it's the first session of two parts that I'll be releasing over the next couple of weeks. And so today we kind of delve into what does intentional teaching look like, why is that important, what is the role of teacher, and just what his research says. And John Hattie has undertaken a long-term research project with over, I think it's 250 million students, which is in itself, I was just thinking about it after the session, is amazing to have across the world. And just the things we talk about from the research are really fascinating. So I think I have his book, and I have some of the takeaways are from his book, but also just some of the takeaways are from some conversations that I've had with teachers, and it's really made me think about, why does the research say that? What does the research suggest? And that's what comes out of the conversation is John's really provoked by the results, and he's not saying that is what it is. He's saying, what does it mean from the research? What can we learn from it, and what can we do about it as well? So I think we'll just get started and we'll just dig in. John begins by I begin by asking John about what does it mean to be a change agent, one of the mind frames from his book and from just his research. What does it mean to be a change agent as a teacher? And I think this means a lot to me because there is a big change in the script. So what is the role of teacher? What does agency mean? Agency is a big topic across the world now at the minute. So getting learners to drive their own learning. What is the teacher's role in that? And so I began by asking him, what does it mean to be a change agent? So let's hear his response. And I really hope you enjoy with lots of top tip takeaways. And remember to comment if you have just your thoughts and your top tip takeaways from this session. Enjoy.
The major theme of that way of thinking is I want teachers, when they walk into a classroom, to say that they are responsible for making the learning happen. I'm not a great fan of the guide on the side or the transformational teacher that says that we're going to let kids discover learning for themselves, because firstly, you don't go to school to learn that which you already know. You go to learn that which you don't know. And this is where a person like a change agent can really make the difference. For many kids, they do have some abilities to make their own changes to themselves, but it's even as we as adults, if you ask me to learn how to play canasta, a card game, I probably wouldn't know a hang of a lot about how to do that without a really good teacher. So there is a time for a teacher to be deliberate in terms of the change agent. And one of the other parts of a change agent is that there's also a time deliberately to let the kids trial and error, to let the kids make mistakes, to let the kids work together. And that is a deliberate action on the behalf of the teacher. It doesn't, in my opinion, it doesn't happen as often as it should do. But again, it's that deliberate action. So change agent doesn't mean that you stand up the front and talk all day. It means that you choose the right moments, the right times, the right structures to let kids enjoy the struggle, because I think struggle is an attribute of learning, not an attribute of a kid. to join the struggle of learning, but deliberately knowing when to come in, when to get out, knowing what happens. And I think that's something that's really critical. And the reason I really want to push this one, Naomi, is that the evidence of those teachers who have the biggest impacts on kids is they are very deliberate. They are very intentional. They are very much in control over what's happening in their classroom. However, they have the ability to hand over some of that control to the students to go through the learning process.
And I think like we'll talk about agency and learners driving their own learning. That's a very big topic of discussion at the minute as well. And I think that's where maybe the misconception can happen is whenever they're driving their own learning, that doesn't mean that the teacher isn't doing anything at the time. I think that can be a misconception of, instead of it being changing the script from teachers being the one that tells all, it doesn't mean that you're not telling anything because you're taking that role.
The effect size, how big the effect is of student control over learning, it's almost zero. It almost doesn't have an effect, because we don't actually want students to have control over their learning in the sense that they choose what to do next all the time. Because more than often, like we as adults, we choose to do next what we already can do.
Yeah.
It's what we don't know what to do. Now, of course, I want students to know what to do when they don't know what to do. I want them to have some sense of agency, as I'm sure we're going to talk about. But it's not simply just handing over control to the learner. So it's exactly what you've said.
Yeah. It is tricky though, because that's what we're trying to like really discuss at the minute, like as part of our agency team. Like that's what we're really, really trying to delve into. What does it look like? And I think, like you say, you always choose what you know what you want to do, and the learners are almost saying to us, like, we get it, we do have to choose, but actually they always revert back to just, can you just do it, like you just tell us kind of thing. And I think that's what we're noticing is the more that we're trying to facilitate them to take ownership, but also like walk alongside them and do it with them, and like have those conversations. The more that we're having conversations as teachers, we're noticing that the learners actually want to just have that. They want that conversation. Yeah.
There's a bit of a conspiracy too, because kids above the average want teachers to talk more. They want more factual information. They want to do what they're already very good at, which is sort of rote memory learning like that. It's kids below the average which want to engage more in a conversation about, well, how did you do that? Tell me more about the process. Get me more involved. But the conspiracy of classrooms favour high levels of teacher talk, high levels of students asking factual questions and vice versa. And that's one of the things, like I know about the school that you're in Stonefields, where you deliberately do the opposite. Yeah. It's almost impossible, given the way you set your system up, for that to happen in a class situation. But that's just not the norm, unfortunately.
And I think that it's that transition between it, and it's helping teachers, because like you say, like I've heard a couple of times where you say that if it's done well, it's done good, but actually, if you have to understand the concept of that to be able to actually do it. And I think like that misconception is what leads to a couple of times where it is the teachers, they have good intentions with actually trying to get learners to drive their own learning, but it's actually the understanding of what that means, what the role as a teacher means. That's the misconception, I think, sometimes as well. Yeah. So it's just that teaching as well of that making those links, isn't it?
It also brings you nicely to what you're just talking there about agency. And I think that's it's a very contestable word. And agency doesn't mean that the students do everything in the same way we don't want adults to do everything just by themselves. There's a skill knowing when to ask for help. There's a skill working with a more expert. And to me, agency is more about helping students understand how they go about choosing various strategies to learn, giving them alternative strategies if the first one doesn't work. For some students, they apply a strategy. If it doesn't work, they do it again. Well, that's not a very effective method. And so having 2 or 3 strategies, knowing how to evaluate when good's good enough. So being more involved, in my language, assessment capable, in the sense they know how to interpret, and teach them a good sense of knowing where to go next after the first notion. Feedback's a fascinating one, because we often think of feedback as something we give to students, whereas student agency to me is the opposite. It's students able to receive and understand and act on the feedback. And that is a taught skill. A lot of students get feedback and they say, yep, okay, that's it, gone, forgotten. But they don't actually we don't teach them how to use it. And agency is getting them to predict what they think the next step in learning is. And all of those require a deliberate change agent to help them do it. Whereas too much of the agency talk is about student talk, students on representative councils. We've got to listen to students. I don't think that's agency at all. It's listening to them about their thinking and listening to them about their learning. And that's quite a big difference.
So getting them to be able to talk about it is a factor. Yeah, it is tricky though, because it's kind of like it's a completely different way of approaching the teaching aspect as well. Like even like the way that we are kind of taught to teach, that's kind of it's a new way, but it's also not a new way as well. Like it has been, like a lot of people have been thinking about it. But where have you seen the pockets of that happening quite well? Like, is there any places that you would say that you have seen that happening for a long time?
Well, the first place you see it happen is when teachers learn to shut up. Like teachers talk on average around 80 to 90% of the time. And so it's very hard to hear how students are thinking, how they're reacting if you're talking that much. And certainly when I travel around the world, I see some stunning examples of this happening. And obviously I've been in your school, and in your school, the teacher can't stand up in front and talk 90% of the time. It would be absolute chaos if you did that. Deliberately, it would be chaos. And so how you structure opportunities for kids to go into the learning pit, make mistakes, build up the concept so they know what the errors are, and do the kind of work that is so critical here, where students learn to work with each other. And that's a deliberate set of skills. Like we know often that when we as adults work with others, it's easy to do it by ourselves. And so we don't have a lot of faith that groups are very good. But what you're trying to do in your school is teaching the kids that working in groups does have value. Everybody can be a winner, but everybody has to make a contribution. And that requires quite a lot of work by the teachers to set up those tasks, to set up those structures. I think that's very, very powerful. I think one of the mistakes we also make is seeing agency about just the processes and the deep learning. It's also about knowing how to get the surface learning, when to stop learning lots and start using lots. And that, in my experience, is hardly ever talked about in our business. And sometimes, and again, kids below average want to know lots. They think good learners are kids who know lots. They can do quiz programs like the Chase and Mastermind. Well, they aren't necessarily our best learners at all. It's having that balance of the surface and the deep, and knowing when to stop learning lots and start relating to them. That's also a power of agency.
And I think that's like we're talking about, it's just making my brain kind of click together, is I think the misconception, because it shouldn't be as much teacher talk, that means that the students, like where does a great takeaway I think would be a great, I think that might be where the misconception is. The less we're talking, the less we're doing, but that actually doesn't mean that. Do you know, like I think that's might be where the misconception maybe might be, is like the children are talking all the time, so we're not doing the talking. So that's where the misconception could be. So maybe talk about that.
Not teacher talk. Like we're doing quite a few studies at the moment on what students talk about. And Graham Nuttall from Christchurch did this in the 80s and 90s. And they don't often talk about learning. It requires a deliberate act by the teachers to make sure that happens. So that we're just thinking of agency as student talk is quite a misconception.
Yeah. So what were some strategies you've seen that maybe the deliberate act the teachers put in place to enable student talking? Maybe that would be a good takeaway for the.
Well, the most effective, with an effect size about 1.2, which is huge, is the jigsaw method. Have you ever used the jigsaw method?
Yeah, I've actually been looking at that. I haven't it's similar to what we're talking about reciprocal teaching. Like it's similar in that way, but yeah.
Somewhat, yeah. And what I like about it is like there are various rounds, and it requires, again, as we'll certainly appreciate, quite a lot of teacher involvement. Round one is you get kids in groups of say 5, A, B, C, D, E. You give them a task, like something to read. Each student in the group, A reads a certain part, B reads another part, but they read it to work out what they don't understand. And then all the A's get together, then all the B's and all the C's, and they talk about what they didn't understand. So each kid becomes a bit of an expert on one area. Then they go back to the original groups, and the A's explain to the B's, C's, and D's what they understood, and so on around the group. So they're building up collective understanding. And the last step is where they actually do something to relate the various parts of the A, B, C, D, E together. And the reason why that works is it's got a mixture of the surface and the deep. Like so often, teaching methods like problem-based learning, discovery learning, start too early. They start before the kids have the knowledge. And they often leave a lot of kids behind. But in the jigsaw, the kids are all, every kid, no matter where they start, is kind of forced to get some knowledge and understanding. And I think that's very, very successful. Like another one's like reciprocal teaching. It's very much about teaching skills of summarization. What's the big ideas? And what's the coat hanger to hang ideas on? Getting students to learn how to generate questions. Because every time we as adults read something, we probably say, I wonder what that means. Well, often kids assume that they're supposed to know, and they skip over it and think, oh, I'm a dummy, I can't know that, so that's okay. But generating questions, and then obviously working together to clarify and understand. And then the hardest one of the lot in reciprocal teaching is then predicting what's going to happen next. And those are very deliberate ways of teaching kids the strategies of looking at the surface and the deep. And that to me is, a couple of very powerful methods.
Yeah, so I think that was one of the questions I was going to ask you. It leads quite nicely into the reciprocal teaching element of it. I think that's why I've been really, really liking, and I've been using in my teaching with, especially with the reading. And I think the more that we can get the learners to build their voice, I think that's like it's building their voice in a way that they know what to do with their voice, not just using their voice for just talk and just like have their opinion. It's actually scaffolding and deliberately teaching how to use their voice for what they need to do with their learning. And I think that's the connection that I've really liked with reciprocal teaching.
You were an early childhood teacher when you started.
Yeah.
And if you go and look at 3, 4, and 5-year-olds, the most common question they ask is why. They're inquisitive. They want to build a theory of mind. They want to understand. Unfortunately, by the time they get to age 8, the most common question they ask is what? It's about the knowledge. Ironically, when they become teenagers, the most common question is why not, but that's another story.
That's all.
And my argument is how to get that why back into the learning, because it's the wonder question. I wonder what's happening. And unfortunately, by the time kids get age 8, they're socialized into classrooms where their job is to come, sit up straight, look busy, and watch the teacher work. And that's just not conducive to what we're talking about with student agency. As you know, in Stonefields, again, you can't do that because of the way you structure your classrooms. You have to be involved, and the teacher has to involve every one of those kids in ways that are quite different from the normal class, because your classes are more like 90 to 100 compared to the usual one. And so it does require you to think quite differently. And I think that's the power of what you're doing. You're breaking that mold where, and this is a problem with parents. A lot of parents went to a traditional classroom where they did sit and they did try and look busy all day. The other part of it is, and the work we're doing at the moment, is when you ask teachers about what does it mean when kids are engaged in their learning, unfortunately, too often they're engaged when they're doing.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of doing going on. And doing doesn't necessarily lead to learning. Like when we analysed in Auckland, actually, a study looking at first-year teaching of reading, and we said, what's the most common activity in the classroom that a kid's involved when they're being taught to read? You have any idea? It's a trick question, so be careful. The answer is colouring in. There was more colouring in reading classes than there was reading, followed by pasting. And you think, and if you ask those teachers, as we did, they say, oh no, they're reading, they're doing, they're doing. And we said, yes, but there's no reading going on. And the other thing in that study that Johnny Van Hayes did was looking at teachers, so looking at students who are struggling to read, reading to each other. And then they went up and they read to the teacher. And the teacher said, these kids can't read. But when you watch them reading with each other, they were decoding, they were trying to work out the pictures and the words. They were much better when they were working with each other than they were working with the teacher. Because when they went up to the teacher, even at age 5, they knew that if they didn't know the right word, just wait. Teachers are nice people. They'll fill in the word. And so that whole socialization is sometimes not conducive to what we're talking about in terms of the excitement and wonder of learning.
And I think that comes back into the questioning element of it. I think like that for teachers actually teacher questioning, and I think that's a really powerful thing with the reciprocal teaching is actually what way you're talking to the learners, and that's what I was interested with the visible learning element of it, trying to see what way the teachers actually talk, and it's not about the amount of times you are talking. It's actually about what you're saying, and that's
Yeah.
what we've been really looking at as a team for agency is actually what is the teacher saying and the question that they're doing. So the questioning to get them thinking. And that's a big part of what I've been looking at for reciprocal teaching is what can we do, what banks of questioning could be used to support teachers to question, not to give answers or not to say, okay, that's the answer, that's the missing word that you're missing, or that it's actually the questioning comes into it as well.
And certainly, if you look at Martin Nystrom's work, he calls it when teachers ask impact questions, questions about the work that the kid doesn't understand, questions that open up opportunities, as opposed to the traditional item response question, what's the answer here, what's the answer here? And it's really hard to ask those kind of open questions, but you're right, that's the skill.
Yeah. And that's where the deliberate acts of teaching come into it. It's that's where your voice actually matters. And I think it's not about, we could talk, that's what really has been my most impactful thing is I started recording myself and recording my lessons, and I thought I was asking quite open questions, and the questions actually were, but the amount of words I put in between was actually just that was the waste. That was like the teacher talk. There was so much of it, but the actual questions were the most important part, and that's what got the conversation going. That's what happened. But it's the recording yourself, I feel like, is a really good way for teachers. It's very intimidating and very, like, whenever I first recorded myself, I was like, oh my goodness, what's it going to look like? But the good thing was I did kind of you had no option but to really notice what was happening in the good way, but also what was happening maybe not in the not so good way.
And that's what the students hear.
Yeah.
100% of the day.
Yeah. And that's
if you did the recording, and how many student questions there about their work they didn't understand.
Yeah.
Were there many?
Not to begin with. No, I've really been working on that part of it, but it's. I think the hard part is as well whenever you do like whole group. That's why I like reciprocal teaching, because it's like what are you setting up whenever you're not with the learners, and then whenever you're with the learners, it's a lot more smaller, like impact groups. Yep. And that's where like I like the teaching part of it. I like that element of the reciprocal teaching as well. Yeah.
Oh, I think it's an excellent method.
Yeah.
Wow. So many takeaways from that. It is a 2-part series. So this session was all about deliberate acts of teaching, change, agency. And the next session goes into effect sizes. So I was quite curious about what John's ideas were in regards to class sizes and where that sits in the effect size continuum. So that's what we talk about in the next session, which we're getting released next week. And we also delve into where subject knowledge, what area does that play as well. So yeah, and one of my biggest takeaways was the teacher versus student talk. And that's something I've been really diving into as part of my inquiry over the past couple of years. And I'm thinking about what is my role. So I mentioned in there that during teacher training, you kind of do delve into it, but there's so much happened in education, even in the past 5 years since I've left university. So much has changed, even in that space of time, and it can constantly changes. And the biggest thing is that changing of the script. So, what is a teacher's role in the classroom? And one of the biggest things that he said about was the activating the learning. It is our role to not be at the side. And that's something that I've been really delving into with my team at Stonefield School. What does it mean to do that? And talking to teachers about if we're trying to build that voice, what's our voice doing? And the thing that keeps coming up is that intentional questioning, planning the question that you're actually wanting to ask, saying that, provoking that, activating that learning. But then you take a step back. But you're not taking a step back to let that all happen and that all just formulate itself, because a lot of times that's where the frustration happens, because it's not formulating itself. But it's actually, what is that intentional question that you're using to provoke, and then scaffold that conversation, see what happens next, grow their voice. But you're part of that journey, not at the side, just walking alongside that journey. You're in it, you're getting involved in it. And that's been a really big noticing that I have, and it's been really great to have a conversation with John about just ideas that he had. So he said obviously the jigsaw technique. So I'll put some links about that into the notes that you'll see on the website. And that sounds really great. And reciprocal teaching, that's what I've been trying to work on, trying to find out more about. So you're activating the learning by working with smaller groups. There's workshops going on. The learners can practice what they are doing while you're activating the learning in a smaller group session. And you're constantly provoking them, giving the vocabulary. He mentioned Yanni Van Hayes, who is amazing. She's part of our Misconceptions cluster. She's influencing in that way, and she talks about gifting vocabulary. So the kids won't get that vocabulary unless they're obviously researching it, or we're gifting them intentionally, saying this is the vocabulary that's going to help you with this part. And yeah, I think that's what reciprocal teaching really means to me. And it was really cool to have that conversation with John. But I think it comes back to, and that's what we keep mentioning in our conversations with teachers at Stonefields, is that intentionality behind it, that intentional, deliberate act. And we know what we're intending to do. And it might grow, you don't want it to be, this is what the goal is, stick to that. But having the understanding of what the starting point is, and then going from there. Yeah, I think that's like a really big takeaway for me. So what was your takeaways? What did you enjoy? What did you relate with? What provoked you to think, actually, I don't agree with that? Was there anything in that session that you thought about that? I think that's what I love about the conversations, is we don't have to actually agree, but where are we coming from? How can we learn from each other? And yeah, like I said, I'd love to hear your top tip takeaways. So you can contact, obviously, on Twitter. My handle is @Naomi_Toland, or you can tweet out with hashtag top tip takeaways, or you could say hashtag buzzing brain. So walk out your brain buzzing from that conversation. And I will, like I said, I'll be having lots of links and lots of links to what I've been using in the classroom in relation to reciprocal teaching. And that links very much to my tool that I'm creating with Kalani. How can we promote reading with that? I'm creating resources there, so that link will be up on the website as well. So you can find that at createeducate.com or in the link below. And I'm excited to hear about what your takeaways were. And I'll be also uploading a lot about Google Innovator, because I think it's just an amazing program that really makes me excited about teaching. So it was really cool to find out that there's so many more things that we can do to ignite our passions as teachers. And I think sometimes it can be very like a downward spiral, because there's so many things that we have to carry and wear, but it just makes me really excited that there is things out there and people are getting so excited about education and the future of education. So I'll be posting on Twitter and on Instagram and just on here on my website as well. Just my takeaways from Google Innovator. So you can subscribe or follow me on all those platforms if you would like to find out more about that too. So yeah, I hope you enjoy and start empowering yourself from the takeaways from today. Like I said, I'm just always grateful for people who I am looking out to and I'm reaching out to, and everyone has open arms who I'm linking up with. So actually at the very end of this, it was really cool here. Craig Kemp, so he's at Mr. Kemp NZ. He's a really great innovator in his space. He actually works in Singapore and he's made so many connections. So I've actually connected with him. So he's a really cool person to look out for. And Ben Somerton, I'll put the little links in as well, who is working at Singapore American School. So yeah, I've been really grateful they opened their doors and told me all about what it's like to be a teacher in Singapore. So check those guys out on Twitter as well and on the websites. I hope you have an amazing day, and I need to go into the aircon now because it's quite hot. Yeah, enjoy.